This is David Henderson. He is our wonderful board member of Mental Health America of Greater Dallas. He is also the CEO of Four Stones Collaborative, correct?
Hmm.
And is a psychiatrist for teens and adolescents. So today we are talking about the pandemic of fear and the pandemic of panic and what the media does to elevate those levels of anxiety in our lives. So, our first question today, David, is what is the pandemic of panic?
So a pandemic in general is a sort of an illness, a disease, an infection that spreads and spreads very rapidly. It spreads globally. And we can talk about viruses and bacteria, and we can talk about these sorts of infections, but I think it's also important to address our emotions and how those emotions can spread very rapidly as well. So, what I found fascinating through this whole coronavirus experience is that the fear surrounding it started out as a little seed, and there were a few news reports about something happening in China, and sort of disregarded it. It wasn't super interesting or relevant at the time, but rapidly, very quickly, the reporting on that got more and more and more to the point that everyone was just scared to death. And the hard thing with fear and with our emotions is finding the balance between accepting that fear, that anxiety is a healthy emotion, that it's important to feel some level of stress, some level of anxiety, because it can actually motivate us. And I think one of the positive things that's come out of this whole experience with the coronavirus is that we have reacted to it and responded to it for many of us in a healthy way by practicing social distancing and being informed about how to respond to it, educating ourselves on the virus itself and how it can be spread and transmitted and what we can do to take care of ourselves. So that fear of getting sick, of becoming ill, it's motivated us, and it's motivated us on a national level as well. I think that it's fortunate that this was the coronavirus and not something else like Ebola, which can be much more life-threatening in terms of its effects. And because of our experience of this, we've started to work out the kinks in our system in how we deal with these kinds of things. So there's a lot of good, a lot of positive things that have come as a result of some of that anxiety and fear associated with this infection. The danger is when our fear then translates into paralysis or just downright panic. And it leads us to act and react to situations without actually thinking them through. And the perfect example of this is, people running to the grocery stores to buy up all of the toilet paper and all of the paper towels that they possibly can because of this fear and anxiety that sort of this is the end of the world and it's survival of the fittest. And if I don't have all of these resources and things, I'm not going to survive. And that's where it becomes extremely dangerous, is we start acting almost in irrational ways that lead us to do things that we would never normally do in circumstances when we have the time and the capacity to think through it logically.
Yeah, definitely. Especially since this virus itself isn't necessarily a digestive issue. So, not 100% sure why people are buying toilet paper, but they are. And so, for people that don't have a lot of experience with panic and anxiety, what are some of the effects that it can have on the body?
That's a great question. I think in general, we're talking about susceptibility to illness. And one of the fascinating things that we found through doing research is that people who struggle with chronic anxiety and panic, their natural cortisol levels, which is the body's chemical reaction to stress, heightens. And it's important to recognize that cortisol levels ebb and flow, and they actually can ebb and flow throughout the day. The problem is that when we're under chronic stress, those cortisol levels remain chronically elevated, which actually can enhance our susceptibility to infection. So it's kind of interesting, because the more anxious and stressed and panicked we are, the more potential there is for us to be susceptible to things like the coronavirus and infections. That's not necessarily the point that I want to make. The point I think that's more important is that fear often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we fear, if we let it take hold of us and really control and consume us, we actually end up experiencing the very thing that we feared happening in the first place. And that's the danger. And when we see a pandemic like this, and we see sort of the mob mentality and mindset, crowd psychology, how a small little fear, if it starts snowballing, actually leads people to respond in a way that the fear comes true. And
Yeah.
so you start out, one or two people think, oh, this is the end of the world. So what do? They start reporting on it, and they start talking about it. And, I appreciate the media keeping us informed, but the danger is that many media outlets use this as an opportunity to enhance ratings. And the way they enhance ratings is by getting you to believe that you have to watch what they're reporting, and that if you don't, you're going to somehow miss out on some vital, important issue. And so they create this hype and this anxiety in order to keep you watching, keep you glued. And so we saw that, in this whole process, there was a lot of just fear mongering taking place. And the very things that we feared have actually come to pass because of that panic. So the stock market crashing, that is all psychologically based. It is all fear-based. And so I see this with clients every single day. They come into my office and they are wrestling with a particular fear and anxiety. And because they are giving it credence in their life, it actually becomes what they feared. So I can use the example, if I say to you, you don't like me very much, or you don't think this interview is going very well, I can tell. And you say, wait a minute, I think it's going fine. I mean, you're answering my questions sufficiently. And I go, no, I can tell by your facial expressions that you actually think this interview is going bad. And I keep harping on that. What ultimately ends up happening? Well, I spend my entire time talking about how bad the interview is going, and then it actually is a bad interview because
Bad, yeah.
I'm not answering the questions. And then you walk away going, yeah, that stunk. That was terrible, talking to Dr. Henderson. And I walk away going, see, I knew all along that you thought it was a bad interview. And then I take that reinforcement into the next interview that I do, and the next and the next and the next. And before you know it, the very thing that I feared is exactly what I'm experiencing over and over and over again. And this is why it is so important for people to confront the pandemic of fear and how it can influence and take complete control of your life.
Yeah, I always tell people that whenever I have a panic attack, that panic leads residue fear and anxiety, and I start becoming afraid of the panic itself. So it just
Exactly.
feeds each other and then leads to another panic attack because I was afraid of having a panic attack. And it's
Right.
funny how much our brain can somehow take control of our behavior. And the fact
Right.
of if we don't talk about it and really think about it in the correct way, our thoughts can get lost in the anxiety and fear.
Right. That's
Mhm.
right. Yeah. And so the question becomes, well, then how do you treat that? And it's very paradoxical. The idea is that you actually, unlike the coronavirus, you have to expose yourself
Mhm.
to that fear and to that anxiety. What is the worst case scenario that you imagine in your mind? And yeah, it's helpful to kind of, have a contingency plan on how to avoid that. But you also have to confront the possibility that if that were to happen, I could manage it. I could handle it. I could take care of it. And interestingly enough, that's what we're going to end up doing with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we come up with a vaccine, or we come up with some sort of treatment that we can give but it's exposing people in small increments and in small ways to the very thing that they fear, and helping them recognize that, yes, as bad as it may be, we can get through this, we can survive it.
Yeah, definitely. It's all work in progress. That's what I've noticed. It's a day by day. No one really knows what is going to turn into. So I noticed you had said on your social media not too long ago, you had talked about just panic and the actual dangers of the pandemic, of panic, almost more dangerous than COVID-19. Do you feel like this pandemic of panic that media is creating could be more dangerous than the virus itself? What's your view on that?
I think that's there are two extremes, and there are two extreme responses to something like this. One is to place all the credence and all of the important emphasis on the virus itself. And then the other group, tends to go to the other extreme of saying, no, this virus isn't that big of a deal. It's not an issue at all. We should be allowed to do whatever we want to do. And I think either extreme is sort of the wrong response. Do I believe that the coronavirus is dangerous? Absolutely. We're seeing the evidence of that. People dying. It can be a serious disease. Uh, the important thing also to recognize, though, is that people die every single day from all sorts of diseases, all sorts of illnesses. The flu itself kills thousands of people every single year. One of my favorite movies is actually called The Dark Knight. It's the Batman movie. And interestingly, the guy that plays the Joker, I don't know why, but I'm blanking on his name, but he says that, as long as everything goes according to plan, nobody panics. And it doesn't matter how horrific that issue is, as long as it's going according to plan. The moment things are not going according to plan, people start really panicking and stressing out. The truth is that this is another example of something that, yes, can put us in a life-threatening situation, but it's not the first thing that we've ever experienced. It is one of many issues that can put our lives at risk. There are hundreds of thousands of people struggling with addiction every single day that are threatening their lives. They're threatening the lives of their families. And we should be focusing on these things, but we shouldn't be panicking about them. And I think the same is true for the coronavirus. So yes, is the coronavirus dangerous? Yes, potentially it can be for certain people. Is it something that we should address and handle safely? Absolutely. But is the danger of our fear associated with it just as destructive, if not more so? I would have to say yes, because I think that it does cripple a society when we react in this panicky sort of way. The ripple effect of the coronavirus is going to go far beyond the physical infection, and it is going to go much further into our psychology, into our sociology, into our economy, and into our governmental response to these kinds of issues. And I think it's really important that we as individuals consider how the coronavirus has affected us psychologically and how it's going to impact our society as well.
So you've talked about all of these issues that come up with this pandemic and fear. What are your tips on staying mentally healthy during this worldwide crisis?
Well, when a worldwide crisis sort of stops us in our tracks, there's a number of responses, and we saw this back during 9/11, which was an absolute tragic event in our nation's history. And we often talk now about pre 9/11 and post 9/11. It had that much of an impact on our society and the way that we do things on a day-to-day basis. And I think the coronavirus will have a similar impact. We will probably be talking pre-corona versus post-corona in the way we talk about societal norms and our own psychological health. Um, so I do think that um, the reaction that we have is significant. And when 9/11 happened, there were a number of things that we did and we were almost sort of compelled to do. One was to keep the television on 24/7. There were people who had their TVs going, and they were moment by moment, even though the reporters were saying the exact same thing over and over and over again, it was this constant running background in people's lives. I think it's important to create some space, to create some distance from the pandemic and from the anxiety that's going on. And so turning your television off, what new information can you possibly be gathering in a day or two? I think it's important to stay informed, but it's also important to take breaks. The other thing that I would do is learn some adaptability. It's interesting how creative we as human beings can be when our normal day-to-day routine is upturned.
Yeah.
So find a hobby or something that you wouldn't normally have done, something that you can enjoy or develop. If it's work related, be creative in how you respond to your clients or to your boss or to your employees. There's a level of creativity that I think we can explore that can actually turn out to be a tremendously powerful thing in the days and months ahead. But also try to maintain as much consistency and routine as possible. You know, I went into the office today. My building hasn't been shut down. And so I decided, even though I didn't have any clients scheduled face to face, I got up, I got dressed, I took a shower, I went to the office, got some things done. I'm back home. I'm still planning on doing some work. But you've got to maintain some consistency and routine in your life. And then, you know, if you really are struggling with a tremendous amount of anxiety or depression, or you've got circumstantial things that are affecting you, reach out to someone that you trust and that you believe you can process these things with, and talk to them about it. And maybe it's a friend, a family member, a coworker, maybe it's a pastor, someone at your church. Or even a mental health professional who's been trained in dealing with these kinds of things. I've been practicing psychiatry for 15 years. And even prior, before that, when I was in medical school, you know, I lived through 9/11, lived through Ebola, lived through all of these different tragedies that have occurred. And we as human beings, we survive. We keep moving forward, but it's important to process mentally and emotionally what you're feeling. And I think now is a great time to invest in your mental health.
Definitely. Definitely a great time, because what else are we going to do? All right. Well, those are all the questions I have for you. Do you have anything else you would like to say?
No, just I would say to those folks who are watching this, you know, we are going to be okay. You know, the world will keep turning, the sun will shine tomorrow morning. And whatever stress or whatever anxiety that you are feeling as a result of this situation, just recognize it's patience. It's taking one step at a time, doing everything within your power to take care of yourself and those you love, but also trusting the reality that there is a higher power that has everything under control. And, you know, you just have to live by faith every single day and just trust that in the end, there's going to be something redemptive for you personally that comes through all of this. And what I'm excited about is seeing all of that redemption take place. And so, you know, just keep your eyes open for it. Encourage people around you, look for opportunities to lift people up, and we'll get through this, as we have many, many other things.
Many, many other things. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Henderson, for coming and joining us. And I hope to see you soon.
Take care. Thanks for having
All
me.
right. Thank you. And that is it.